So, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm Spy Knight, and in these podcasts, I like talking all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm reviewing the new Bob Dylan biopic, which is, of course, A Complete Unknown. So, let's get into it, shall we? A Complete Unknown is this new Bob Dylan biopic which stars Timothee Chalamet as Bob Dylan alongside Ellie Fanning, who's in the film, and Monica Barbaro, Joan Baez, and Edward Norton as Pete Seeger. And this film is directed by James Mangold. And if you're not familiar with James Mangold by name, he has directed such previous movies as Logan, Le Mans 66, AK Ford v Ferrari, Girl Interrupted, Copland, Night and Day, which I think is actually quite an enjoyable film, The Wolverine, which I think is one of the better superhero movies to come out in the past couple of decades, Identity, 3:10 to Yuma, which is a great Western movie in my opinion, and the latest Indiana Jones film, which I don't care what anybody says, I enjoyed the latest Indiana Jones film. Heck, I loved it. In my opinion, it was a worthwhile addition to the Indiana Jones franchise. And amongst directing those movies that I've just mentioned, he also directed another musical biopic in his time, which is, of course, Walk the Line, the Johnny Cash musical biopic. And Johnny Cash actually has quite a big role to play in this film, in A Complete Unknown. And I heard this said in an interview recently that James Mangold did for this film, and I was like, oh my god, he is the first person to cast two different actors to play Johnny Cash. Because in Walk the Line, Johnny Cash is played by Joaquin Phoenix, and in this film, Johnny Cash is played by Boyd Holbrook. Apparently, James Mangold did consider bringing Joaquin Phoenix back to play Johnny Cash in this film, but he didn't want that to be the talking point. At least that's what I've heard. So yes, we have a different actor playing Johnny Cash in this film than we did in Walk the Line. And a little piece of trivia there: James Mangold is the first person to cast two different people as Johnny Cash. So there we go. So yeah, James Mangold is a phenomenal director. Even the worst of his movies are still, at the very least, enjoyable. Like Night and Day isn't a great film, but I find it really enjoyable to watch. And, like I said before, even the worst of his films are at least enjoyable. And many of his films are absolutely fantastic. I mean, he's a guy who directed Logan, Girl Interrupted, Le Mans 66. I remember when Le Mans 66 came out in 2019, and I have no interest in cars whatsoever. But because Le Mans 66 looked great, and because it was directed by James Mangold, I went to go and see it on the first day it came out in cinemas. That's how great of a director I think James Mangold is. I think he should be considered alongside Denis Villeneuve and Christopher Nolan as one of the best directors working today. I don't know why he isn't. I don't hear enough people talk about him, in my opinion. So yes, you get the point I'm making. I absolutely love James Mangold. So you'd think I'd be more excited. You think I'd be dying to watch this film because it's James Mangold, it's got a great cast, and it's a musical biopic. And when a musical biopic works for me, it can really work. How many times have I spoken about my love of Elvis, Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, on this channel in the past? But, honestly, I wasn't that excited about watching this film. I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't not interested in watching it, but I wasn't excited about it. And the two big reasons I wasn't excited about watching this film is because reason number one, I am not a fan of Timothee Chalamet. And the reason I say his name like that, by the way, is because his name does annoy me. It's just, I don't know why, it just bugs me. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Timothee Chalamet. Most of the time when I watch him in films, his performance doesn't work for me. With the exception of Wonka. I enjoyed his performance in Wonka because it felt like he was having fun. You don't often get to see Timothee Chalamet have fun in a role. But, yeah, for the most part, he just bugs me in a movie. Like, whenever I watch him in a film, whether it's the Dune movies, Little Women, or whatever, I feel like I'm watching Timothee Chalamet do a performance. I don't feel like he sinks into the character. I feel like I'm just watching him perform and do acting, you know? And that just bugs me. So yeah, I'm not really a fan of Timothee Chalamet, don't get me wrong, I don't think he's a bad actor, but for the most part, his performances have not worked for me personally. And the second big reason I was not excited about watching this film was because I'm not a big Bob Dylan fan. If you hadn't guessed already, I'd be surprised if you hadn't guessed because it's on the t-shirt I'm wearing for today's podcast, I am more of a Beatles fan. You know, I appreciate that so many people love Bob Dylan's music so much. I get why it speaks to so many people. And I don't dislike his music. It just isn't for me. And that's totally fair, you know. There's plenty of music which isn't for me. And I have listened to quite a bit of Bob Dylan music in my time. Because my dad used to be a humongous fan of him. Probably the biggest fan you'll ever come across of Bob Dylan. I mean, he's sadly no longer with us anymore. He passed away a couple of years ago now. But I have vivid, and I mean vivid memories of being in the back of my family car and being on these long car journeys for hours and hours and hours and hours on end and listening to Bob Dylan for hours and hours and hours and hours on end. You know, the amount of time I spent listening to Bob Dylan music, even so it hasn't really worked for me, would shock you. You know, it would really shock you. I've listened to so much Bob Dylan music in my time, and it hasn't been for me. So for those two big reasons, I wasn't really excited about watching this film. I'm not a fan of Timothée Chalamet, and I am not a fan of Bob Dylan. But I was interested in watching this film nevertheless, because it is directed by James Mangold. And as what he said, whenever James Mangold brings out a movie, I immediately get interested in it. Just because of the director he is. He's such a versatile director, and I can't wait to see what he's going to do next. Whether it's a big blockbuster or a more intimate film on the lines of, say, this one, which is not... it's still, you know, it's quite a big movie, but it's more intimate. It's, you know, it's not got as big of a budget as, say, the latest Indiana Jones movie, you know what I mean? So whatever James Mangold directs, I immediately get interested. Plus, the cast for this film, minus Timothée Chalamet, is pretty great. So yeah, I was interested in this film, I just wasn't that excited about it. But I still went to go watch it on the day it came out a couple of days ago now. And the Google plot synopsis for the film goes as follows. In the early 1960s, 19-year-old Bob Dylan, played by Timothée Chalamet in this film, arrives in New York with his guitar and revolutionary talent destined to change the course of American music. Forming his most intimate relationships during his rise to fame, he grows restless with the folk movement, making a controversial choice that reverberates worldwide. And that's pretty much all you need to know about a complete unknown before seeing it. And as already said, I'm not a fan of Bob Dylan, and I am not a fan of Timothée Chalamet. So, I am very surprised to say, I actually really enjoyed this film. I really liked it, and I couldn't believe how much I was into it whilst I was watching it. It engaged me from very early on, and it kept my engagement throughout its 2-hour runtime. I mean, I don't know how long the film actually is. One sec, I'll have a quick look up on Google. The film is apparently 2 hours and 20 minutes. I didn't know that, and it didn't feel like 2 hours and 20 minutes. It kept my engagement for the runtime that it was on. And I was just watching this film with a huge grin on my face thinking, wow, I get it. I get why Bob Dylan's music speaks to so many people. I get why people like his music so much. I get why people like folk music so much as well, because I've never really been a fan of folk music. There's some folk songs which I quite enjoy, but for the most part, folk music just isn't for me. But I was watching this film and I was like, I get it. I get why people like his music so much, and I never really understood that before. And this film made me appreciate Bob Dylan in a new light, to the point that over the past couple of days since I first watched this film, I had been listening to Bob Dylan's Spotify a little bit, you know. I want you, I want you, I want you so bad. I mean, I can't sing Bob Dylan to save my life, clearly. But, by the way, a little funny thing here. I remember coming out of the cinema, I watched this with my brother, and he came at the cinema and he said to me, the funny thing is, Bob Dylan, you know, he's one of the best songwriters of he's one of the best songwriters ever, and he can't really sing. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of the reason I've never really been a big fan of him. But still, over the past couple of days, I have been listening to a bit of his music because of how this film made me view him in a different light. Plus, I thought that Timothee Chalamet was actually really good in this film. And I am shocked to be saying that, because again, I am not a Timothee Chalamet. His name annoys me so much. I'm not a fan of his. I'm just not. But I thought his performance as Bob Dylan worked for the most part. There are a couple of moments in the film where it feels like he's doing an impression. And in the end, his performance in the film is an impression of Bob Dylan. But when I was watching this film, I didn't feel like I was watching Timothée Chalamet do a performance. I felt like I was just watching him sink into the role of Bob Dylan. Kind of similar to how I feel when I'm watching, what's his name? Austin Butler as Elvis in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. Or when I'm watching Joaquin Phoenix as Johnny Cash in Walk the Line. So yeah, I thought Timothée Chalamet was actually really good in the film. Not the best performance in my opinion. The best performance in this film, for my money, it's probably Edward Norton. I think Monica Barbaro is great as Joan Baez. I'm not somebody who's particularly familiar with Joan Baez, but I thought she was really strong in the film, and I thought Elle Fanning was great as well with the material she was given. I would have given Elle Fanning a bit more to work with, but I thought she was also fantastic in the film. But at the same time, the best performance for me was Edward Norton, who I thought, I don't know, there's just something about his performance, just something about his performance which grounded the film for me. And that's another reason I liked it so much. It was different than other musical biopics I've seen recently. Other musical biopics such as, Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, which I've mentioned quite a few times in this review, or the Robbie Williams biopic, Better Man, which I watched not too long ago now. And, I enjoyed those musical biopics quite a lot, but they are fantastical. They're over the top. And I enjoyed seeing, and that works in their favour, by the way, but I enjoyed seeing a musical biopic that was more grounded and intimate in its storytelling, similar to Walk the Line. There are a lot of similarities between A Complete Unknown, between this film and Walk the Line, James Mangold's previous musical biopic, which came out, almost 20 years ago now, if I remember correctly. There are a lot of similarities between these two musical biopics, and the reason I like these two musical biopics quite a bit, I mean, I don't love either of these musical biopics, but then again, I'm not a big fan of Johnny Cash or Bob Dylan, and these films have made me admire them. And the reason these films have worked for me is because there's a grounded and intimate nature to their storytelling, which I liked, and it was a nice difference it was a nice change from other musical biopics I've seen recently, to just have this story told in a less fantastical way, and in a more intimate and grounded way. And let's just tell the story in a way that feels as real as possible. And I personally really like that. And I don't know how much of this film is true, because I don't really know Bob Dylan's story. But I felt that it felt real enough for me to believe in the story being told. You know what I mean? And the funny thing is, yes, it's a musical biopic, and yes, it's centered around Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan, the character of Bob Dylan, if you will, in this film, has a character arc from the beginning to the end of the film. But you come out of this musical biopic not really knowing much more about your lead than you did going into the musical biopic. I mean, I learnt a lot more, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, pun intended here, he comes out of this film as a complete unknown. Bob Dylan is still a complete unknown. I can't sing again, save my life. But he comes out of this film as a complete unknown. You still don't know a lot about him. And yet, the film does a great job at least for my money, at giving Bob Dylan, the character in the film, if you will, a character arc, and you do care about him, but you don't learn that much about him, and I really like that, because so many musical biopics in the past, and again, musical biopics I have enjoyed, but musical biopics in the past usually do a really great job at getting under the skin of its protagonist, or getting under the skin of its lead, should I say, or, they try to get under the skin of your lead, but they don't always succeed, like the Bob Marley musical biopic didn't really do that, but it tried to, and I felt that Back to Black, the Amy Winehouse biopic, tried to get under the lead of its protagonist, or tried to get under the skin of its lead, but didn't really succeed. And this film doesn't try to get under the skin of its lead, and I think it's all the better for it, funny enough. And that's one of the reasons it stuck out to me. I mean, there are many ways it sticks out from other musical biopics, Timothée Chalamet does his own singing as Bob Dylan. I think he does a really great job. But also, because it doesn't really get under the skin of its protagonist, I felt it was different than other musical biopics I've seen, which is another reason I liked it quite a bit. And again, like I said before, I found it engaging. I thought it was a really well-directed film. I mean, James Mangold clearly knows how to direct a film like this. And I love the way the camera moves. I love the way he shoots so many sequences. James Mangold is such a good director. He's such a great director, even. I don't understand why he doesn't get as much love as other directors like, say, Christopher Nolan, because I personally prefer him over Christopher Nolan. Yeah, and I thought the performances, the supporting performances from the likes of Monica Barbaro, Elle Fanning, and Edward Norton, as we already said, were all great. And the great thing about the supporting performances as well is I didn't feel like I was watching these actors play these real-life people or play these characters. I felt like they were just sinking into their roles. And you have quite a stacked cast in this film, but I never felt like I was watching that cast. And that's a big plus for a film like this, which has, like I've already said, quite a stacked cast. And I loved how this film threw you into the 60s aesthetic. I didn't feel like I was watching a film which, was made a couple of years ago. I think it was even made last year, actually. I think they shot it and edited it, and it came out in the same year, which doesn't usually happen with movies. But apparently it was only made last year, and I didn't feel like I was watching a film that was made last year. I felt like I was almost on this time capsule back to the 60s. I mean, it does look like a film that was made, in the recent years, from the way it's shot and everything. It's got this beautiful look to it. But at the same time, what I'm trying to say is I thought the 60s and 70s aesthetic of this film, well, not 70s actually, the 60s aesthetic of the film was realised very well. And yeah, there's just so much about this film which I really enjoyed. I'm not saying it doesn't have its flaws. One of the flaws, off the top of my head, would be there's some moments when the film spells things out to you, and I was like, yeah, I didn't need that to be spelled out to me. I understood what was going on in the scene without that. And from what I've heard, there are a couple of parts of the film which they change from history. Like, there's a famous thing of somebody shouting Judas to Bob Dylan at one of his concerts in Manchester. But in this film, it happens in Newport, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong there. But anyway, the point is they change the location of where that happens, and apparently that's quite a big moment in Bob Dylan history, if you will. But they change that in this film, and I've heard some people annoyed about that. Personally, I wasn't, but I'm not quite sure why they changed it at the same time, because that Judas thing did kind of feel unnecessary in the scene that it was in the film, because the scene was already making the point, and then the Judas thing was added in there as well. Like, did it need to be in there? And maybe that's just because I knew going into the film that they changed that, because I'd listened to an interview with James Mangold surrounding the movie. But at the same time, I could get past all those flaws because I was just so into it. I couldn't believe how much I was into it and how it made me appreciate Bob Dylan's music. I suppose the last big reason I liked this film was because of a bit of a personal reason that I've already kind of spoken about. But I was watching this film and it was a little emotional, because as I said earlier on this review, my dad was a huge Bob Dylan fan, and he's sadly no longer with us anymore. And I was watching the film thinking, I bet he would really enjoy this. And I bet he would get so much satisfaction out of me enjoying this as well, because I was never a big Dylan fan. I never really gave Dylan much of I never really gave Bob Dylan much time, and whenever he would stick on Bob Dylan in the car, I just would say to him, I don't get it. And now I do, and I wish I could reverse time and just show him this film, because I think, I just think he would really enjoy it. So that's another reason it worked to me. I got a little bit emotional there, but I was watching this film thinking, God, he would love it. I mean, he might not love it, actually. He'd probably be quite picky with it, knowing him and his taste for movies. But I bet he would enjoy it nevertheless, I bet he would enjoy it. And you know what? I enjoyed it. I really liked it. It's not one of my favourite musical biopics, I still prefer probably the fantastical nature of other musical biopics like, say, Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. But at the same time, I like watching a musical biopic which does things differently, which tells its story in an intimate and grounded nature, and also makes the story feel like a journey, but without getting under the skin of its lead. And that isn't going to work for everybody. Some people will watch this biopic and may feel unsatisfied by it. But personally, somehow this biopic didn't get under its lead, but still managed to feel satisfying to me. And it made me appreciate why so many people like Bob Dylan's music so much. It also made me appreciate the song Like a Rolling Stone, which has been stuck in my head ever since I watched this movie. Like a Rolling Stone. It's not stuck in my head right now, of course it's not, but still, it's been stuck in my head for the most part ever since I watched this movie. So I really liked it, and so for that reason, I'm going to say that A Complete Unknown, I'm going to say it's a 7.8 out of 10. I'm not giving it an 8 out of 10 because I didn't love it, but there was so much about this film which I really liked. And again, I just couldn't believe how much I was into it. It was really enjoyable to watch. And that's coming from someone who's not a fan of Timothée Chalamet and not a fan of Bob Dylan, but who ended up enjoying this film far more than they expected to. Maybe I'll feel differently about it when I watch it on TV. Perhaps so. But watching it in the cinema, I felt like I was learning about this part of Bob Dylan's history which I didn't know before. And learning about all the parts of his history there, again, made me appreciate his music more. And did make me think, God, I wish my dad was here watching this with me, because, then I could actually say to him, I get why people like his music so much, and I get why you like his music so much. So that was another reason that I enjoyed the film. And I did really enjoy it overall. I really liked it. And so that is why I'm going to say once more in today's podcast that A Complete Unknown is a 7.8 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen A Complete Unknown, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. I look forward to many more podcasts and many more videos coming very, very soon on this channel. As I've already said, thank you so much for watching or listening to this podcast. And I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.